Because they don't get to own the entire planet, Sean.
I
What if he
know.
destroys the Earth and he has his little, oh look, it's just a coincidence that the genetically perfect people are rich on Mars, then he gets to be in charge of that. And no one he doesn't like is there.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show at the movies.
South Korean sci-fi cinema says trans rights.
Yeah! Woo! Go South Korean cinema, doing what American cinema has still not done properly.
It's too fucking chicken shit to handle!
I'm Sean.
I'm Alex.
And on today's show, we'll be discussing Space Sweepers, the new 2021 South Korean space western that you need in your life right now.
Yes.
Desperately. It's on Netflix, at least in most places. And if it's not on Netflix where you are, I don't know, pirate it. Find out how you get it. Because it's worth it. It's directed by Jo Sung-hee and starring Sung Joong-ki, Kim Tae-ri, Jin Sung-kyu, Yoo Hae-jin, and Richard Armitage. And I apologize, I tried to look up pronunciations for all of the names, including in interviews, and I had some difficulty finding a bunch of them. So if I screwed those up, please correct me.
I just love like the juxtaposition of like this amazing list of Korean actors and then Richard Armitage.
The most white name.
like a name so white it was created in a lab.
Doesn't it seem? It seems like not a real name. It just seems a little bit too perfect for who he is in this movie. For those that don't know who Richard Armitage is, he did play Thorin Oakenshield in the Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy, which is probably what he's most famous for at this point.
Oh God, I didn't even realize that.
It's unrecognizable. He
has a giant beard.
But yeah, and anyway, so it's got an interesting cast of people.
Before we get started, a friendly reminder that we want to hear from you. Share your comments with us about this and past episodes at skiffyandfanty.com/listener-suggestions. All one word. We want to put together a listener mailbag episode with your thoughts, questions, topic suggestions, and more, so get those thoughts in. And ask us some, like, really fucking weird questions.
Yeah.
Just for Sean.
I think that's an appropriate addition to this, Alex.
Just, like,
thank you.
Any question that you ever wanted to hear this man, like, just make up some shit by pulling it out of his butt, just send it in.
Oh, I'll totally do it. If we want to do a whole episode where it's just weird questions that don't have correct answers and we just have to make up the answers, I'll do it.
We'll do like a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation on the various Hollywood unions that Sean has referenced over the years and their connection and, you know, which one is like the local 1150 and, you know, who has ties to the SEIU and who knows where Jimmy Hoffa is buried and all that.
Yeah, we'll eventually have to do something that silly. This is just wild. Well, okay, so we got to get into this movie, and that, unfortunately for Alex, means it's summary time for you. So what the hell is this movie about?
So this movie is about a kind of post-apocalyptic Earth in the near future being 2092. Where the Earth is a disgusting smog-filled hellscape that no one can live on. And of course, the rich people have absconded to orbital habitats where they live lives of wearing beige. And Richard Armitage is in charge of them as the CEO, who is definitely not Jeff Bezos, except he totally is Jeff Bezos. And all of the orbital rich people colonies are corporate. And basically, you have all of the schmucks, the billions of schmucks who live on the Earth, and then a few people who get, like, visas to go up into the orbit and, you know, do, like, labor for the rich people in orbit. And one of those jobs is to be a space sweeper, which means you basically are flying a ship around at dangerous speeds and trying to catch space junk that you can then sell for bulk elements and parts. That's, like, the universe setup. And what we get is, in this world, a crew of space sweepers who are all South Korean. Their ship is called the Victory, and everyone is scared of them because they're fucking badasses. And it is Tae-ho, who the movie opens on, and you just know that he's looking for, like, a dead little girl.
Aww.
Trust me, it gets even sadder than that as the movie goes on. Captain Jang, Uncle Tiger and Bubs are the little crew of the Victory. Everything is like going terribly. They're a bunch of fucking trash gremlin losers who I adore every single one of them. They're like a fucked up dysfunctional little found family and they're just absolutely terrible. And then they find this little girl who has been on the news as Dorothy, who is supposedly a lifelike child android who has a bomb in her. Instead of doing like rational things, these poor people who are just drowning in debt are like, what if we sell her? And then it just gets dumber from there in the best way possible.
Yeah, it really does.
and it should be noted that, of course, more evil Jeff Bezos definitely wants the little android bomb girl too. And that's how they cross paths.
Dun dun dun!
Yeah, and that's where I'm going to stop because after that we're getting into spoilers.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will put up a spoiler one in a short bit because I think Alex and I definitely have some very specific things that we want to dive into with this film because there's a lot going on. I think both Alex and I agree. We were saying this before we started recording, which is that in the very best way, this feels like an animated feature-length film. You know,
yes.
Done as like an anime, except it's not. It's done live action. It's been hailed as kind of one of the first big live action space sci-fi vehicles in South Korea. I don't know if that's actually true, but...
Yeah, I've heard it pitched as like Korea's first science fiction blockbuster. Because it is very distinct from like the stuff that like, this is really different because it's definitely like a special effects action comedy, throw everything at the wall and there are spaceships.
I mean, literally one of the characters is just a robot. It's like a dude showed up on set in a mocap suit and was playing this just wonky former military robot. So there's a lot of CG being done here, as a lot of blockbuster films are designed, and yet this film cost roughly $21 million US.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with some general reactions. I think it's pretty clear already that we both like it, but Alex, what is your general reaction to this film?
So my general reaction is like, so my tagline was South Korean sci-fi cinema says trans rights, which I mean, we will get into like detail later, in a way that kind of encapsulates a lot of how I feel about this movie, because it is a sci-fi quote-unquote blockbuster that does so many things that American studios have been too chicken shit to even contemplate. It's like multinational, it's got a trans character, it has fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It looks at its concept and says, you know what? This concept is stupid and I am going to lean into it, as opposed to like so much like American cinema, even fucking like the superhero movies, like Marvel, like MCU stuff, feels like they're being like, oh, well, but it's superheroes, but elevated. And this is like, no, we're a bunch of fucking trash gremlins in a spaceship stealing satellites. Fuck off. And it's so into what it is. And it's just like, we're going to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and we're not going to have like, oh, everything has to like wrap up neatly. And it's glorious. I wish that anything that got made in America recently was this brave, because it really is just brave enough to be like, yeah, we're going to take this tragic backstory and then we're going to like turn it to 11. We're going to do all of these things that a bunch of like serious science fiction critics would probably whine about. And we don't give a shit because we're having an amazing fucking time the entire time it's going on. Oh, and it has a color palette, by the way. I mean, there is like a lot visually and a lot of really cool stuff going on. But I mean, one of the things I fucking love is that the only time you get the sort of like shitty washed out sci-fi cinema color palette is when they're in the fucking rich people, everyone's wearing beige colony in orbit, because that's where the evil people are. And then the color lives elsewhere in every other scene.
That's a really interesting point, because like the only real color that they get is in the like floating biodome that they have. But we don't spend mostly any time in the biodome itself, like where all of the plants and trees and their fake mountains live. We spend it mostly like inside their facilities. They're very sort of like standard science fiction, like, oh, everything has to be like this very specific sterile sort of look.
Well, and even when they're in like the kind of the living area where it's like the floating habitat, even that is not like it's green and blue, but it still feels muted compared to how like saturated the color is elsewhere. And
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing I would point out is, okay, so like as a world building thing, this is not a spoiler because it's literally in the first 30 seconds. This is like a very self-consciously multinational future.
Yes.
Where like one of their little technical things is just everybody has like a little Bluetooth headset that just provides instant simultaneous translation. So like all of the characters are speaking their native language to each other and it's not a thing. So the South Korean characters are all speaking South Korean. There's a guy who speaks Arabic. There's a guy who speaks some kind of like patois. Like it's really cool. And the other thing that I noticed, especially on the second viewing through, is like when you're out there where it's all colorful and awesome and it's all the little like, you know, working class trash goblins, you just hear like all of these languages just all the time and all of these accents. And then you go into like the fucking rich person at Habitat and there is nothing spoken there but English.
Yeah, that was the thing that I thought was really interesting. And by the way, depending on which audio track you get, the languages change somewhat. So when I started on Netflix, I had it set as English with the English subtitle or English dubs. And the very first, the white woman who's, I don't even know if she has a character name, but she's German in the English dub.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but she's not in the Korean. In the Korean, she speaks English. And so it like was really interesting because I think at one point she used the word shit, and obviously in shit in German's a little different. And I was like, what? Why is she speaking German? Like, what is happening here? And then I switched over and realized, oh, there's just a lot of this huge internationalness here. Like there isn't a moment in this where the exception is like the very beginning where briefly she says like the thing isn't working right. And she bangs it in her ear. But for the most part, the film just kind of like moves on. Everybody speaks their own languages. Their languages are being preserved. And they don't need to have a universal language in this world. It's not necessary anymore, which is kind of ironic that you bring up that the people in the Habitat, pretty much all of them speak English, including people who clearly English is not their first language. His like handler, the guy who's like his second in command, clearly he has a very strong accent. He only speaks English in the film.
Yep.
And I think that's really interesting that that's the perspective that's being presented.
I mean, I feel like just in the world building and the way it's all put together, the movie has a lot to say about American imperialism and, you know, that kind of
Western
stuff.
Imperialism.
Western
yeah,
imperialism.
Cultural imperialism particularly.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something that I was interested in seeing how it was going to go because the very beginning of this, I thought this was going to switch into like being very like South Korea nationalist, given that the main crew, who's the big troublemaker, they're all Koreans. But that's not the direction that it went at all. They ended up being this openly multicultural space. They just inside the ship itself, everyone on the ship happens to be Korean, but their interactions, they don't seem to give a crap of like who they end up working with at the end of this film. It doesn't matter. Like you could be from Nigeria or India or wherever. That doesn't matter to them. It's the humanity that's there, and it's the Habitat that seems to be, I should say, not seems to be, is explicitly, the people who run that are explicitly not for humanity. In fact, Richard Armitage's character says point blank at one point that most of the people on Earth, and by most I mean the 3 billion that still live on Earth and are stuck there, are basically genetic inferiors that must be exterminated in order to pave the way for living on Earth, which is where I know that you said Jeff Bezos. I immediately went Elon Musk.
I mean, he is kind of like the evil twisted love child. I mean,
he is. Yeah, if they had a demon baby, this is what would happen. Yeah.
The eugenicist narrative of imperialism is like made so strongly in, I mean, bless Richard Armitage for just like chewing on the scenery the way he does. But there's this amazing moment where he's like talking to this reporter, and, you know, the reporter is basically being like, what the fuck, you know, there's all these people down there, blah, blah, blah. And the guy is just like, oh, well, they're genetically inferior. But not only that, when the reporter is kind of like, yes, but all of the people you've rescued are the rich people, he's just kind of like, yeah, that it just worked out that way. You know, like the implication being like, of course all the genetically superior people are the rich ones. Duh.
Yeah, very, very much a future that you could imagine happening based on the way things are now, which is interesting.
Like this very like white supremacist, ableist, corporatist. Yeah.
It really is. So my general reaction is, honestly, this was just an immense amount of fun.
Yes.
Like, yeah, there's lots of meat and stuff that you can chew on, but as an experience, it's just a really joyful and emotional experience. It's honestly the only thing that makes this not South Korean Star Wars is that it's only centered around the Earth and little hints at Mars. It doesn't have quite the same widespread scale, but the amount of visual spectacle and adventure that's present here is almost at the same level.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's got so much of the larger than life characters. I mean, you have figures in this film who are, people who have dark pasts and are trying to move past those things, people with traumas that they're working through, people who are just fun and really interesting. You have the little kid, Dorothy, as she's referred to it from various points throughout the film, who's just really delightfully adorable and cute. Yeah, but overall, like, this film is just an enormous blast to watch. Honestly, you should watch it. That's really what it comes down to. Like, you should just turn off the podcast right now, come back to it later after you've watched the film.
Yes.
Because it's fantastic.
Look, people, you just need to understand that this film was basically like they went through a checklist of things that Alex is weak to. There's the terrifying man who is extremely, like, loving to children, who Uncle Tiger. There's like the guy with the exceptionally tragic backstory. There's the badass lady with a giant gun. I just can't. It's so good.
All right, spoiler wall is up so we can get into more spoilers than we've already given. All right, Alex, go for it.
I just want to talk about, like, Bubs, okay? Uncle Tiger is kind of like the character of my heart because he is the terrifying murderous gangster with a heart of gold and a weakness for children. But, like, I love Bubs so much. Because, okay, I mentioned at the beginning that, South Korean sci-fi cinema said trans rights. It gave us an openly trans character who gets to go through her transition, through the course of the movie. And, like, literally, which is Bubs, by the way. Like, I mean, literally, she keeps saving all this money. She has, like, a stash of money that she is saving for her transition. She is fucking amazing, and I love her. And I can, I want to put it out there that I understand, like, if some people have kind of some more complicated feelings about Bubs, because there is something about, like, when you're kind of, like, the minority and you get to be the alien or the robot, which is a little, like, But Bubs is such a fucking delight that I just cannot have a problem with her, and I love her so much. The other thing that just struck me on like the second viewing of this film that is kind of special to me is, like, it's not only this depiction, when there's a character where you're like, you find out that they're trans and blah blah blah, and so often that it's like depicted as like their gender is bestowed on them, or look at this poor person putting makeup on in the mirror or something. Bubs depicts a moment of gender euphoria, which I have never actually seen in a movie in my entire fucking life, where there's this scene, she and the little girl, Konim, are like talking, and up until that point, you could read Bubs as kind of like just a very campy gay man, but, like, Bubs is putting, like, makeup on Konim, and they're talking, and then Konim basically just, without, like, making it a thing, just recognizes Bubs as a lady. And Bubs, like, blushes and feels so happy and is like, oh my god, we're girlfriends. And just that moment, it's not like Bubs is struggling with her presentation and has finally gotten it right and is female enough. It's just this little girl just looked at her and saw her for who she is. And then later on in the movie, Konim is also just like, I think you're perfect the way you are, when Bubs has, like, gotten her, like, skin graft and stuff, and she's thinking about changing her voice. And Konim is like, but I think you're perfect and I like your voice. That moment to me actually just felt really special, because it was just like this moment of pure happiness that wasn't, like, overly serious or anything like that. But it was just like, yeah, Bubs is a trans lady, and she's awesome, and, Konim could tell, like, that she was like, oh, well, obviously you're a girl, because you're so good with makeup.
And I will just say, not really that good with makeup.
Oh God, no. I mean, poor Codenham ends up looking like a drag queen. It's not great.
A bad one, a very bad one. I should note. Yeah, I definitely. I mean, obviously, I didn't have quite the same emotional reaction to that because it's a little bit less directly personal. But I really appreciated that this was there. Like, it was part of the character arc. It's one of those things where, like, there's kind of, like, two different ways of representation. There's this sort of, like, very overt, like, it needs to be a big deal. And then there's the kind where it's, like, they just exist. And this sort of, like, feels like in the middle of that, where, like, she's there, but she's mostly, like, just doing what she normally does, like, running around kicking ass and being a smart mouth robot. And then has moments of this that brings in those more serious portrayals and significant treatments. And I just felt that overall it seemed to work really effectively at getting the point across that it needed to get across. It didn't need to spend a lot of time on it. Like, in a lot of ways, this film doesn't do that with almost any of its themes. It gets to the point very quickly in a lot of those components and lets them kind of play out over time, which I think is one of the benefits of this film that maybe other science fiction films would not do by, maybe not portraying things in a very positive light. This is a very positive portrayal. Like, this character is a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
But also is, like, accepted immediately by this child, which is a huge deal in the entire consequence of the film. And so it was a really nice touch to see this done. Also, I like that the transition happens at the end. And the very first time that we see her is her threatening Porky, who is mentioned early in the film, which I think was really, really funny for me. So,
and I mean, I think the other thing I love about Bubs as kind of a portrayal is that, it's not like she's being like, oh, in order to be a woman, I have to be like super femme or whatever, which, there's not anything wrong with being super femme. That is not what I'm trying to say. But it's also just being like, there is a range of experiences, and this is the kind of woman that Bubs is. She's apparently running around with a harpoon while wearing this amazing, like, pink sweater with a keyboard on it, which is just... Bubs' shirts are, like, their own story. I don't know what's happening with them.
There's a thing in this where it's very clear that you see this a lot in animated shows, where they spend a lot of time on, like, the concept of the character.
Yes.
And how the visual concept, like, what they look like visually. And every single one of our main cast is very particular. There's Uncle Tiger, who has all these tattoos, who looks kind of, he's got kind of these dreads, and he's got this very particular look. He looks like someone who belongs in an engineering bay.
I keep noticing, like, the silhouette of his pants is really interesting because it's like a drop crotch trouser.
Yeah.
And he's got, like, this, like, like leather rig that he wears. Yeah, I mean,
it's so particular.
Well, and then you get Captain Jang with her, like, red t-shirt with the yellow smiley face on it.
Right, and always with her flask.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, except at the very end because she quits drinking.
Because everybody gets better at the end. And then, and then poor Taeho. Like, I will note, like, Taeho, who could have been just, like, this, like, sort of generic, angsty, pretty man, and instead, like, honestly, the other amazing arc, like, small character arc in this movie, because he's got, like, his big tragic arc, but is the thing about his shoes.
Yeah.
So, like, at the beginning of the movie, when he wants to go, like, see if the corpse of the little girl that's been found is the one he's looking for, he has to, like, give the mean lady his shoes. And then he spends, like, the rest of the movie, like, in his socks that have holes in them, or with trash bags taped to his feet, or, at one point he's, like, looking through a bin and trying to find a pair of shoes he can wear. And then, like, at the end, when everything is happily ever after, and Codenham is being like, oh yeah, and Captain Jang stopped drinking, and, Bubs got to transition and all that. And then we get to Taeho, and she's like, yeah, he bought, like, 10 pairs of shoes.
And he's got a fresh pair on. Yeah, because there's this great scene when he's trying desperately to push her away because he doesn't want to think of her as a person. He wants to think of her as a payday. Like, there's a scene where he's gluing his shoe together, the sole back into his shoe, and then eventually that's his moment where he breaks down, because not long after, right, he goes to try to help wash her hair, and all of this is happening, and that becomes the big breaking point for his story. And I think it's not long after that we get part of his tragic backstory, isn't it? Or it might be like immediately before.
I think it actually might be before, because I remember it's when it happens, it's like, it's Codenham being like, why is he scared of me? And
Yeah.
Bubs is like, oh, well, he's just like desperate and mean. Like, and then we get some of the tragic backstory, and you're like, my God, like, leave some tragedy for someone else to, oh, Jesus.
Right. Well, and of course, like, they all have a degree of tragedy about them. Some of it is their own fault, and some of it isn't. So for him, it's he used to be in the sort of military, paramilitary unit that protects the...
Well, it's not just was he in it, he was, like, the first
the commander.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was, like, the big commander. And the first time he had to shoot a child, he couldn't do it. And so he took this child home. Their parents were dead, and he raised this kid as his own kid. And then there was his luck ran out, right? He was exiled from all of the rich people. He lost all his privilege and went into gambling and drinking. And he lives with this tragedy of, he basically told his kid to go get food and leave him alone while he was gambling. And that's when there was some kind of an attack or disaster.
Yeah, it was basically just like some space debris hit the habitat, and it decompressed.
And she got sucked out into the dark. And the rest of the movie has been him trying to get the money so that he can find her. And we learn at the end of this, it's not just that he wants to find her body. He wants to have a memory moment with her. This is apparently a possibility in this world. And he gets to do that through Codenham by her using her nanobots. She has nanobots that, like, hang out with her and, like, do special stuff. And he gets to basically say goodbye to his daughter in, like, the second most tear-jerking scene, like, ever. This film, like, rips your heart out a bit with his story. And I love it. I love that they didn't just do what you were saying, like, make him just the angsty pretty boy. Like, no, the way he behaves, there's a reason for it, right? It comes from severe trauma. And I love that this film dealt with that very explicitly.
I mean, there's just so much good stuff, like, and it's interesting because he also has, like, the most complex backstory that requires the most explanation, because, like, Captain Jang is also, like, an exile from the rich people habitat, because she also got, like, she was brought in as a genius, and then she betrayed Richard Armitage by being like, oh, actually, you're bad. And she tried to kill him and didn't succeed.
Yeah, she joined, like, a terrorist organization, a mercenary group or something.
Yeah, an anti-UTS organization, and, like, that's her thing, and now she's a criminal under an assumed name, and Bubs is just, like, a combat robot they fucking rescued somewhere, and then Uncle Tiger is like a refugee from Earth because he's under a death sentence because he was a really, really bad man.
Yeah, emphasis on being a really bad man.
Yeah, which, I mean, but is a character trait that actually comes in handy and is useful toward the end of the film when he has to fight the scary lady and he cuts her hand off with his, like, there is not a goddamn object in this movie that is called out that is not used at some point.
Yeah, that was the thing I was noticing too, is how much of this movie, like, every little detail that they bring up comes back later.
Mm-hmm.
So he mentions, like, very early in the film that, like, him and his little hatchet, like, that thing, he used to take hands with it. And then he uses it later in the film against one of those military people who also, they have these really cool, like, mechanical suits that are fucking amazing. They're really cool suits.
Yeah, oh God, they look like, I thought they were robots at first. Like, yeah.
Me too.
They're so inhuman.
Yeah, they seem so inhuman. I think that's the point, because even when we see, every time we see them with their masks on, they seem like they're more like Bubs. They're like, that's what Bubs is. Except that at towards the end, right, with the one female I don't even think she ever says anything. Is it Camilla? I don't know if she ever says anything.
I don't think she does.
She just stares out and
in a very intimidating fashion.
Very intimidating. But at the end, right, she is out of her suit, but she still seems like a robot. She doesn't feel like there's nothing there. She's just dead stare. She just punches and kicks, right? It makes her very deadly because she's clearly very trained, but she doesn't have any emotion when she's doing it. It's just matter of fact. It's really interesting the way that this rich people world is set up. It gives the illusion of love and emotion, but its mechanisms are all mechanical. They're all very devoid of life. They're destructive and inhuman.
Well, and all of them are built on denying or taking the humanity of others.
Yes.
Like, very specifically. And so another thing that I want to say, I will love this movie forever for, because, you know, you mentioned Elon Musk, because he's Mr. I want to have a colony on Mars with indentured servitude.
Yeah, with indentured servitude.
Sorry, servitude. I know how to talk. I haven't been drinking, I promise. Kind of like the thing with Codename, you know, she has, like, nanobots. It's the MacGuffin, you know, one of the MacGuffins in the movie. It's fine. I honestly don't give a shit. But, sure. Like, the whole idea is these nanobots, when they interact with the other nanobots that are just around in the environment, because that's kind of how things are now, can do things like, you know, miraculously heal things and make plants grow. And you find out that evil Jeff Musk wants to have her killed because he wants to go terraform Mars and have his perfect colony of rich people on Mars.
Which he's already terraformed it should be noted. He wants to just take. We get a picture of it.
See, I wasn't entirely sure if that had been like done or if he was like, here's the plant that's going to be like whatever. Anyway, but like, so the thing is, he sees her as a threat because if she goes down to Earth, she can start like basically healing the planet, and he doesn't want that. So, like, his entire plot is he's gonna blow up this little girl and her miraculous nanobots with a bomb so terrifying that it can actually kill the nanobots, and simultaneously cause the factory, which is the big place where all the space sweepers hang out, to crash into Earth and just render Earth an unlivable husk so that the only people that exist anymore are the people in his little corporate perfect society.
It's eugenics. He's committing genocide.
But I mean, the reason I love it for that is because one of the Black Fox people who you know, and this is another great thing where it's like basically Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos is like, oh, they're you know, his media is like, oh, they're a terrorist organization. You find out they're actually like an environmentalist group who doesn't want him to fucking destroy the planet.
Right.
But the Karoom, he's just like, look, if the man can fucking terraform Mars, that's like 1,000,000 times harder than fixing the Earth. Why hasn't he fixed the Earth? Because he doesn't want to. And I was like, thank you. Like, the thing that drives me nuts every time one of these rich fuckers is like, oh, well, we're just, you know, we gotta get off the Earth and go terraform Mars. And you're like, Earth is like fucking easy mode, dipshit. Like,
yeah, that's what I don't get. I don't get that either. It's like we already have a functioning atmosphere. You don't have to build
because they
one.
don't get to own the entire planet, Sean.
I
but
know.
If he destroys the Earth and he has his little, you know, oh, look, it's just a coincidence that the genetically perfect people are rich on Mars, then he gets to be in charge of that. And no one he doesn't like is there.
I mean, it's interesting that the plot that he has really doesn't feel like he's thought through. Like, in a lot of ways, like, you know, a lot of these, like, rich kind of Jeff Musk, Elon Bezos people, right? Which is, like, they have these ideas for the future, which is, like, it's kind of cool. Like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice to have a colony on Mars? That's fun. But, like, there's no concept of, like, what is the ultimate end? Like, where does this go? What is the 5-year, 10-year, 30-year plan? And his is kind of like, I'm just going to kill them all. We're all going to move to Mars. But it's like, okay, but, like, are you going to have, like, robots get all your food? Like, there's a lot of labor that needs to be done. And I don't know about you, but everybody in that facility, that floating biodome, doesn't seem to be like people that are used to doing any real hard work at all. So where is all of the mechanisms that make a civilization go coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they just is he genetically making like trees that shove a plum in your mouth when you walk by? Is that what's happening? Is it just going to be a bunch of people walking down a street and having food shoved in their mouth by mechanical trees? Is that what's going on?
You know, it's a good question. I don't think he'd have the answer to it, but instead he'd, like, throw you on top of a pile of money and then scream at you until you did what you wanted, and then he'd be like, because you did what I wanted, you've proven that you're inferior.
Oh, God, that was an interesting scene. Yeah, the one there with the reporter that challenged him, and he brings him in and basically, like, threatens him and says, you can come live up here and not live in the hellhole that is Earth and bring your family if you just kill this other guy. And he does, and he says that's precisely why you can't come up here, because you're inferior. And it's like, what about you, dude?
Yeah.
just made a guy murder another man.
Well, and he fucking does that. He does that to Taeho too. Like, I mean, and I'm just like, this guy is just, it's so gross. But I'm like, this feels really true to this horrible corporate CEO character where he's like, see, I've managed to badger you into doing a bad thing, thus proving that you were always going to do the bad thing all along. So I'm right, and I'm still better than you.
I mean, it's like inherent contradictions. I mean, the whole thing is a sea of contradictions. There's this great sequence at the pretty early when he's got all the reporters the first time they show up, right? And then there's this whole speech being given of like, you're gonna meet him, and he's like the greatest dude in the entire world, and like, boop, and then he takes them to like his like fern farm or whatever that he's got like genetically modified ferns, and they're apparently 8 times better at producing oxygen, which is like, okay, but like then just plant that shit all over the earth. Like, what are you doing? But it's not it's all theater for him. It's all about like, I'm capable of these great things and I want you to think good of me, but like, I don't give 2 shits about any of the people on that planet. This is all for me, right? Even his dirty hand, right? He has all that dirt on his hand and he wants to like shake that woman's hand, but she won't touch it. And then he eats a sandwich with his dirty hand, and they're all like all reacting as though he's dirty, and he's like, it's not really dirty. The real dirty is like down on earth. That's the real filth. And that's precisely what we all know he means. He means all the real filth is on earth. He's just this really contradictory figure. In a lot of ways, very cartoony as a villain. Like his motivations they're just genocidal. You know, there's no thought in the long term about like what those are going to be. He's just a monster, and he virtually becomes a monster. He's also 150 something years old, we should say, and we don't know exactly why he's that old in this film, but yet he has some condition that like when he gets pissed off, like the veins in his head turn red and he like basically becomes Batfleck for a hot minute.
That was a little that was like a little much, but I don't know, it's like I almost just really appreciate kind of like how cartoonish he is in a sense, because like he seems cartoonish, and then you go and you read some shit that like rich people say about the rest of us, and you're like,
right,
yeah, that's about right. Yeah, you know what? If someone had that level of power, yeah, sure, I could see that. Yeah.
I mean, I know that you had wanted to talk about this, and I think we should bring it up, which is there's a lot of reviews of this, and I think it's got like a 70-something% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics and like 81 or something from the general audience. And this is a criticism I hear a lot, which is like, you make a story and people say, oh, well, those characters aren't believable. But then when you like look at the real world of like the batshittery that people actually do, and you go, no, our fiction is unbelievable, not because the characters are unbelievable in the way you think. That's because they actually are a much nicer version of how reality actually works.
You know, like everyone's up your ass when you're writing fiction, where if you're like, they're like, oh, well, this person isn't internally consistent. And you're like, what fucking human being is?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and this is a good example of it, right? Richard Armitage's character is, inconsistent. All the characters in this are somewhat inconsistent, but that's like what happens when people are people. You do things, and you might do things inconsistently. You might be contradictory or hypocritical. You might, one moment you might make a change, but that change doesn't stick. Like, that's just how people are. And in this, like, the cartooniness of the villain, it's like, but is he any more cartoony than some of the, like, rich villains we've seen throughout history? Not really.
No. And I mean, the other thing that has honestly, like, made me a little, like, cranky about the way I've seen people addressing this movie, because, there's like like tropes, blah, blah, I've had so many people say to me when I was like, oh my God, I fucking love this movie, where they'd be like, yeah, it was a mess, but I liked it. And I'm like, no, I liked it because it was a fucking mess. Like, what is wrong with that? It's almost like this weird, like, pre-defensiveness of like, well, it was just, this glorious concatenation of tropes that just really worked, and the people acted the shit out of it, and they just had a really good time, and I enjoyed it. And I feel like I somehow have to like defend myself for enjoying it by being like, oh, well, I know that it sucked, which it doesn't suck, but you get what I mean? Like,
yeah, people seem to not just be able to just enjoy things. They have to find justification for their joy when they do enjoy something, and then have to find ways to tear something down in a weird way to also justify their joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, I don't feel like this film is a mess. I mean, look, are there some issues with, like, plot elements. There's one I'll probably bring up in a hot minute. Yeah, there certainly are. To me, I would say like this is kind of frenetic.
Yeah.
It's very high energy. There's a lot happening. And I don't mean like a lot happening and like there's the plot's bloated. I just mean like this feels like a world where there are a lot of different things pushing in on our main characters all at once. You know, their debts on the one side, the fact that the earth is dying on the other side, this evil Jeff Musk, Elon Bezos turd gerbil trying to kill everybody. On the other side, you have the traumas that all the characters have. Then you have this kid, and then there's all of that stuff that's going on. And then there's the conflict with the other space sweepers. And like, there's a lot of different elements, but like, that's also real life.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I wonder if maybe what people are perceiving as mess is like those elements that you're talking about, where it's like, in a way, like for all that it is, you know, has some like conceptual silliness, like this is 2092 and they have artificial gravity, whatever, I don't give a shit.
Right.
You know, all those like those social surrounding elements that make it actually feel like a lived in universe, you know, and not everything ties up neatly. And I wonder if that's what people are kind of interpreting as mess, because particularly like, you know, in the age of like superhero films that we've had with MCU, everything is very, very weightless. You know, like there's only a consequence if it's convenient, and then it kind of goes away the next movie or whatever. Like you never feel like, you know, and I love Marvel movies for the most part. I have some bones to pick with some of them, but you know, those characters never end up feeling like real people who are dealing with real problems, because whatever their issue is, it's whatever the plot is, as opposed to like in this movie, it's they have the plot they're dealing with, and then they have 7 million other things they're dealing with at the same time, which I'm like, is what actually makes them feel like believable working class people, particularly the stuff with debt servitude. So like, I wonder if that's what people are like, we've been so trained by a lot of studio films for things to be just sort of like very sterile, and it's just like, well, if it's not directly related to the plot, it's not something we need to have in the film, or, you know, need to have the characters interact with. So maybe what the messiness people are feeling is just like the fact that this is like a world that people are living in.
You know what it makes me think of is, this is referred to as a blockbuster, and a lot of blockbusters in the broad science fiction fantasy genre, for the most part, most of them are very plot forward. The plot is what drives everything, not the characters' issues. If the characters have issues, those are tied to the plot. So like Fast and the Furious, I won't say all of them do this, but some of them were like Letty, for example, when she disappears at one point because she's presumed dead and then she turns out not to be dead. Her issues are directly tied to the entire plot of that movie. Mm-hmm. Right? I think that this film, what it's doing is doing something that you see in a lot of non-blockbuster style film, where plot is not as significant as character design and character development. And what this is doing is taking that stuff and putting it in the context of a space adventure, you know, Western, a space Western, which we all recognize is supposed to be very trope driven, very plot forward, because that's the convention of how it is. But this film isn't doing that. It does have a plot that is very clear. You can follow that plot, but the people's issues are separated from the plot. They aren't necessarily tied only to the plot. And I think that people are just maybe not used to that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about like, okay, so, you know, because we're saying like you have the plot in this movie and it's pretty easy to follow, right? You don't get to like the blockbustery do the thing or the world blows up part of the plot until really late in the movie, which is also like a very different choice than what we're used to, because normally it's like, you know, Fast and Furious, you need to do the thing, and then like the rest of the movie is them trying to do the thing and having like some try-fail cycles or whatever. Whereas this, they're just like, the crew of the Victory is like living their lives and everything sucks, and then they find this little kid by accident, and then they try to figure out what to do with this little kid, and it's not until they've unsuccessfully like tried to sell her, and then we're like, oh, we need to give her to the Black Foxes, or we're gonna do this. It's not until that point when Richard Armitage takes her, and that's when it finally fucking gets revealed that he's gonna like blow up the earth. And that's like, That's like half an hour from the end.
Yeah, like it very much the main plot slow burns,
Mm-hmm.
and then it has a thing that you could argue with some big blockbuster films that they don't have, which is there's way too much action, and so when we get to the climactic action sequence, it doesn't have the same weight because it's been sort of dampened by the amount of action we've already had. I would say that that's a problem I have with Civil War, because the biggest action set piece in that is actually the airport sequence when the two sides are facing each other. But that's not as important as the end action sequence in Civil War, which is the actual Civil War that matters, which is the Cap versus Iron Man Civil War.
Well, and that's the only action sequence that actually has like an emotional story to it. The rest of it, you're like, why the fuck is any of this happening?
Right. Yeah, that has some weight to it because we do have a lot from those two characters. This film, I think, is doing the opposite, which is to say that there are some action pieces, but they're not necessarily action pieces tied to the main plot. So our first big action piece is actually with the Victory, basically stealing a salvage from a bunch of other crews, and that's our big action set piece. It sets the characters up. But our climax feels much more impactful because at the beginning, they're all kind of not really friends. They're not really on the same side. At the end, they're all on the same side, and they all show up together. And I will just say, fuck you, third Star Wars trilogy of the new era for fucking this up while this film did not. Because we actually have plenty of setup that leads us to this climax when all of the other space sweepers come in to help them deal with all these armed drones. It's a beautiful sequence, and it feels like it has so much weight to it that it actually feels like the threat against the Earth is actually a real big threat, that enough people care about this, and that it's going to affect enough lives that when we get that action set piece and we get the release of that, it actually feels like a proper release.
Mm-hmm. In a moment of beautiful class solidarity.
I love it. The one thing I will say that it would be my criticism is that technically there is a plot hole that I found a little annoying, which is there was a big 180 that happens at the end. The heroes sacrifice themselves, right? Trying to get as far away to make sure that the factory doesn't fall and kill everybody, blah, 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 blah. And then we're all led to believe for a moment that that's the end of them. And that's where I thought they were going with this, is they literally sacrifice themselves. But we get another switcheroo, which is that our child character basically uses her strange ability with the nanites to bring them back, save them. The problem that I take with it, I like the 180, don't get me wrong, because then we get the lovely family sequence where they're all basically like teaching her Korean and like hanging out in the ship like a little family, which is adorable. The one problem is that it's also told to us explicitly in the film that the bomb is capable of destroying all nanites, which is the whole point of the bomb in the first place.
So I was not entirely sure about that because I was kind of like, as well. So they make a point of saying like this bomb with its krypton waves, which is just amazing.
Krypton waves, it's so great.
will like destroy Konim and destroy her nanobots and take her to subatomic particles. But they also mention elsewhere that these nanites that live at the Lagrange point,
there's like cloud of them. Yeah.
They call them immortal. And basically what is implied is you've got these terrifying clouds of nanites at the Lagrange point because you literally cannot get rid of them even with this bomb.
Oh, maybe, and I missed it. It's possible.
Yeah, I that is what I got out of it on the second viewing, because I was a little like, but it's also just like, we have a bomb that can mostly kill nanites, but like not these are tough motherfuckers. I don't know.
They're nanites squared.
Immortal Lagrangian nanites. I don't know. They're just like making shit up and whatever.
I mean, there is a bit of that too, which is like you can't really take the science, the quote-unquote science, seriously at all of this, because it doesn't care. It really doesn't. Like, they have like anti-grav, and they're all doing like these crazy maneuvers in their little ships that would like liquefy you. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, Uncle Tiger literally has like a lever he pulls that makes the ship go faster. It doesn't have to make sense. It's just amazing because he makes amazing faces when he's doing it.
I think that would be a fair assessment, and I think this would be a good time to get to final thoughts and grades. And that would be to say that this film is an enormous amount of fun. There is a lot of meat to chew on here. and I really hope to see a lot more chewing going on because there's just a lot. I would watch this again multiple times because it's super fun. And for that reason, I'm giving it an A+, which is something I almost never do on this.
Yeah, that's actually quite rare for you.
I fucking love this film. It's so much fun. It's good.
It is so good.
What about you, Alex?
Oh, I mean, this movie is hella fun. It is...
You just use the Californianism. It's hella
fun. I mean, I can say with absolute certainty it's the most fun that I've had in a science fiction movie since Thor Ragnarok, at the least.
Wow.
And I mean, like, I'm not saying that I haven't seen any good movies since then, because, you know, there's, like, been some good independent stuff that's been going on, but this is definitely, like, the most fun that I had with a movie since Thor Ragnarok. You know, for many, 'cause it's like a fun experience to watch. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but then when you drill down into it, there's like all this like really like meaty goodness. You know, like you could write an entire like thesis about the class narrative of this movie. Like there is a lot of really good shit in it. That is not something you get out of American blockbusters right now, unless, you know, you let Taika Waititi be in charge of them, apparently. It is such a good experience. I have absolutely no reservations about saying I loved it. You know, I don't have to be like, oh, it was good, but no, it was just good. It was good. You should watch it. It's so much fun. I love it. A++. It's amazing. I love this movie. I love Uncle Tiger.
Awesome. Oh, Uncle Tiger. That's such a... Oh, I just love
Uncle
that.
Tiger
It's just
and
so
Bubs.
fun. All right, Alex, it's time for us to close this show out. So, obviously, if folks want to let us know what they thought about this, again, go to skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. You can follow us on all the things. We're Skiffy and Fanty on Twitter and Instagram, and also subscribe to our newsletter at skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. And finally, if you like what we do, support us on patreon.com/skiffyandfanty, where you get things like polls and other kinds of stuff. You get to pick our torture cinema movie, which, thanks a lot, guys. And give us some love on iTunes with a 5-star review and tell us what you think. Yeah. So other than that, you can find me at Sean Duke or SeanDuke.net or patreon.com/thejoyfactory. What about you, Alex?
And you can find me at Katsudonbury on Twitter, at katsudon.net, or at patreon.com/katsudonbury, where I am doing like one good movie a month, one bad movie a month, and then I've been doing TV show recaps. I just finished up WandaVision, and I think next we're gonna try Pacific Rim the Black.
Well, perfect. Go check out Alex's stuff, and thanks again for listening. So now it's my job to make this awkward.
If you were an amazing space robot like Bubs, what t-shirt would you be wearing?
I gotta be honest, it probably would have a dick on it.
It's fair. You gotta go with what's, how it is for you. Like, I'm thinking I want one with like the upside down smiley face.
Oh yeah, dude, you gotta buck the trends. Yeah, I get you. I think I would just want to have stuff that just makes other people uncomfortable.
Jeff Bezos's face.
It would be me doing one of those things where you take like two people and you figure out what their baby would look like, and it'd be Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk.
Oh, no. See, okay, I'm now deeply uncomfortable.
And on that note, awkward ending and scene.
You're welcome, citizens.
If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.